Hi, my name is Yael Unterman. I have been teaching in the June Kollel here at Drisha. And my Dvar Torah for Parashat Nitzavim is as follows. So we have a pasuk in this week's parasha in Dvarim 30:15, and it says as follows: Ha'idoti bachem hayom et hashamayim ve'et haaretz hachayim ve'hamavet natati lefanecha habracha ve'haklala ubacharta b'chaim leman tichyeh ata v'zarecha. I have brought as witnesses for you today the heavens and the earth. Life and death I have placed before you, blessing and curse. And you should choose life in order that you should live, you and your offspring. Now, in my class here at Drisha's June Kollel, we've been discussing the Baal Shem Tov's position on divine providence. The Baal Shem Tov said that everything in the world is under divine providence, even a worm underneath a leaf, nothing to do with human agency. He really sees it in every single detail. And one of the things that my students and I have been conversing about and struggling with is, where does that leave the question of free will? If everything is under divine control, where is our free will? Free will is very important. It's a major tenet of Judaism. And the verse that I just read for you in Nitzavim does seem to uphold the importance of free will. It gives us a resounding command: Ubacharta b'chaim, choose life. Except that giving someone a command to choose is a little bit of an oxymoron, and especially if you're being told to choose between blessing and curse. What is the point of commanding someone to choose blessing? You haven't actually added anything new. It's obvious. Or is it maybe just a recommendation? So that's the difficulty in the Torah, that some things which sound like they could be commands, but they aren't actually. For example, the pasuk that says, Sheshet yamim ta'avod v'asita kol melachtecha. You should work for 6 days, and afterwards you should have Shabbat. There's no command to work for 6 days. It doesn't actually end up being a halacha or a mitzvah. So the language of the Torah, even if it's a commanding kind of language, isn't always brought down then, concretized as an actual thing that you have to do. So maybe it's just a recommendation. But we still have our problem. Why does God even need to recommend choose life? Isn't that obvious? Who wouldn't choose life? So Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler was a prominent rabbi of the 20th century, and he was a Mussar. He was a prominent Mussar rabbi in England. And one of the most memorable ideas for me from his book Michtav Me'Eliyahu is this notion that he gives of free will being like a battlefield. Okay, so in the battlefields that people conduct when they have infantry, I'm not talking about air battles, etc., but in the old-fashioned type of battle, you had a front, a military front, and on this side you had your territory, and on the other side the enemy's territory. But all the fighting took place really only at the front, and that was what moved, right? That boundary. And this is what he speaks about, the nekudat habchira. That is the point of choice, just there at the front. Over here is territory which we've already conquered. It's already ours. For example, most of us are not likely to murder someone in cold blood like Macbeth, okay? So that's over here in the territory that we've already conquered. We don't deal with, we're not fighting, okay? Over here is territory that we haven't yet gotten to. That's kind of very difficult for us. For example, loving God with all of our heart, might and soul, or being completely strict on the laws of Lashon Hara, or all kinds of things which might be rather difficult for us. So we're not really struggling exactly on that front. It's too high, it's too far. Right here is where we're struggling. This is where we sometimes gain territory to here, sometimes we gain it to there. This is where we have the choice and the free will. So what can we do about the issues that fall into the enemy territory? Do we just kind of throw up our hands? Or do we look over there and say, that's where I want to go, that's what I want to conquer? Yes, that's what we can do. And here's where we have to take a very proactive and practical approach. And actually, the verse that I read to you at the beginning appears in a wider context, and it's always important to read verses in the larger context and not just as the single verse. And the context of the verse that we read is an earlier verse that says as follows: V'haya ki yavo elecha kol hadvarim ha'ele, habracha v'haklala, asher natati lefanecha, והשבותה אל לבביך בכל הגויים אשר הדיחך השם אלוקיך שמה, ושבת עד השם אלוקיך, ושמעת בקולו ככל אשר אנוכי מצווך היום, etc. The key word here is V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha. You should return to the Lord your God. In other words, the wider context for our pasuk about choice is one of repentance. And our sages tell us that mitzvah goreret mitzvah, avera goreret avera, that when you start to do a mitzvah, that brings along another mitzvah with it. When you start along a path of transgression, it brings another transgression with it. Another way of saying this is b'derech she'adam rotzeh lelech molichin oto. The direction that you choose is the one that's going to open up for you. You make that choice. So here's what I want to suggest, okay? We all know that Judaism has a very strong action component. It's very much an action-based religion. We know that Bnei Israel at Har Sinai said, Na'aseh v'nishma, let's do it. And then we'll start to understand it from within that doing. The doing comes first. So a suggestion for conquering this enemy territory that seems so high and hard is to start to take on something small. You get up and you take upon yourself a small first step, and then another step, and then another step, okay? But you just do it, right? Like Nike, just do it, right? You get up and you take those small steps. And once you start moving and taking those steps, even if they're small, it has the effect of changing your image of yourself, raising your self-esteem, and making you feel like you're a person who can do rather than a person who can't. You basically have to build on what you've got and take it further. And this is a message that we learn from the very interesting story in the book of Kings about Elisha. So Elisha the prophet encountered a widow of one of the prophets, and she said to him, the creditor is coming. I have no money in the house, and the creditor is coming to take away my children for slavery because my husband's dead and there's no money. So what does Elisha do? Instead of saying, I'm a miracle maker, I will magic some money, some gold coins for you onto the table, he says, what do you have in the house? And she says, just one jar of oil. And then, in an action that very much reminds us of the Hanukkah story, he takes this jar of oil, he requests that she put out some empty jars, and he starts pouring the oil into the jars, and all of the jars fill up and the oil lasts, right? It doesn't run out. And I think that something we can learn from this is that he wants to build on what she already has. He wants to create the abundance from what already exists rather than trying to force it out of nothing. And that's what I'm saying, is that if you have an intention and a desire to go and improve yourself and conquer that enemy territory, that already exists. Then you start to build on that. You take another step further in that direction and another further step in that direction. That creates the momentum to move in the direction that you're choosing. And then you move the front, and the front moves and conquers more territory. And I think that this approach of taking small steps also has one other advantage, which is, and here I'm going to bring a story from one of the Mussar masters, and this is Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe. He was a Mussar master from the last century. And after the Yom Kippur War, Rabbi Wolbe was flying in a plane. He was going to speak to a group of soldiers who were stationed in Egypt. So when he was brought in the plane, the Israeli plane, it approached Egyptian airspace, and then all of a sudden it took this very steep dive, and it was flying only meters above the ground. So the rabbi was kind of astonished at this sudden low altitude, and this was before the landing. They weren't yet landing, and he said, what's going on? And they explained to him that if they fly low here in the Egyptian territory, they will be able to fly under the radar level and therefore prevent detection. And Rabbi Wolbe, being the Mussar mind that he was, took this also as an analogy for something that we can learn, which is that if you take small steps, you're kind of flying under the radar of your, call it Yetzer Hara, or just your natural inclination against change. It kind of doesn't notice. If you make a huge change in your life, there will be a huge rebellion from something inside you that resists change and says, oh, I can't do that. But if you just make some small steps on a daily basis, it's no big deal. It doesn't notice. It doesn't think that anything's happening. And it's almost too lazy to even bother with such small things. You know, like the scene in Shir HaShirim where the lover is lying in bed and she says, there's a knock at the door, and this beloved that she's been seeking for so long has suddenly arrived, and this amazing laziness and torpor overcomes her, and she's lying there, and she says, "Pashati et kutanti echachal bashena." I've already taken off my coat. Am I going to put it back on again? Rachatzti et raglai echachat anfem. I've washed my feet. Am I going to dirty them? This is the beloved she's been looking for in the entire book, and it's just incredible. And then all of a sudden she leaps up, realizing that he's gone. He's gone. She's missed that moment. So I kind of see this this Yetzer Hara that he's describing as being quite lazy and lying in bed. And when we take very small steps, all it hears is like slight movements, and it's like, I'm not going to get up just to check that. That wasn't really a knock, you know. And then we can actually improve without it rebelling inside us. And to bring one more source to bolster this, there's a very beautiful Rabbi Nachman. It's his most famous kind of Torah. It's called Torah Azamra, from Likutei Moharan, and it's Reish Pei Bet. And in it, he basically also says, if you see a person who's evil, and you think that they're completely evil, you can reach in and find a point of good. And when you reach in and find a point of good in them, you literally are helping them to become good by grasping onto that point, that one small point, and you grasp onto another small point. And he says you can also do that with yourself. If you're in a position where you say to yourself, I'm feeling worthless, I'm feeling blue, I'm such a bad person, whatever it is, you can reach into yourself and find a small point of good and pull that, and then you pull another small point and another small point, and together those small points make what he says is a melody. So again, we find that it's the small motions, those small steps, that together will make up a process of tshuva. It doesn't have to be big and dramatic. So what I'm saying, to sum up, is that perhaps when God says choose life, we need to read the verse not as some kind of disconnected command, which is strange, or even as a recommendation, which seems a little bit too obvious, but rather in the context of the tshuva that appears there. If you take steps in the right direction, and you hold an intention to keep moving in that direction, right, perhaps God will also help. So what I'm saying is that in our chapter, God says, when I bring the blessing and the curse, don't give in to the curse and the weakness and the despair that it might bring. Get up, choose the blessing, choose the repentance, and that will bring blessing upon you. Take positive steps in the place where you are. And this is ultimately what it is in your power to choose, because you can't choose the rest of your life. What you can choose is your own actions. So start now. So thank you very much, and Shabbat Shalom.